So good to be with you all here this morning. And please, if you're free tonight, come back because Emma is speaking on Prodigals. So that would be really, really rich, and we'd love to be with you if you're free this evening. So come back. But this morning, firstly, just to say it would be insensitive of me to stand up here and ignore what this nation has gone through politically over the last week. You don't, though, have to know very much about me to know that I am no political expert. I'm a fan of Marsha, but I really am more of a political novice, to be generous with that term. But I can say that this week I have done due diligence, very basic due diligence, which meant I figured out who I should vote for on Thursday. But in my research over this last week, I happened upon something called a thirst trap, which is defined as a social media post, especially a selfie or other photo, intended to elicit appreciation of one's attractiveness or other positive feedback. Apparently, thirst traps have been around as long as people have been able to post photos on social media. But recently, they have begun to be used even by politicians to elicit support from their constituents at key political moments. I can find one of these of Marsha, but for example, this image of the French president, Emmanuel Macron, which he put out shortly after sending troops into the Ukraine. Or this one that Ben Everett put out back in November when he said he's keeping fighting fit for his constituents. Or more contentiously and possibly more smoldering is this one of Josh Moxon in the run-up to the Masked Minister contest at HTC Church Weekend Away last weekend. Now, whatever our thoughts are on whatever is going on in the world politically, we are all thirsting. We are thirsting for change, and we are more and more enticed to satisfy that thirst in people and in things that are ultimately going to leave us disappointed and longing for something more. Instead of getting pulled in by empty thirst traps, I'm going to invite you to look at something that I call a hatch opening. No matter how enticing thirst traps are or how big campaign promises can be, today we're going to explore a deep thirst, one that we all have, no matter how politically astute or tech-savvy we may be. We are going to meet the one who alone is able and more than willing, he's delighted even to meet this thirst. And not just for a 5-year term, but for eternity. We're going to go about the reading a little bit differently this week. We're going to read through the passage and stop at points to unpack what is happening. So let's dive in. Starting in John chapter 4, verse 1. Now Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized but his disciples. So he left Judea and he went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" Now, if we glance back up to verse 4, we read that he had to go through Samaria. To be honest, that's not entirely true, John. If we have a look at this map, we can see there was a far more popular route, more well-trodden route up to Galilee. Jews avoided Samaria at all costs. The Samaritans were considered unsafe. They were considered unclean. They were considered the enemy. So the customary route was to go around Samaria, and everyone knew that. The compulsion here had less to do with the route and more to do with Jesus' determination. Now, it's a little bit like when my family and I go camping at the end of this week. I told my husband, we're going on the West Coast, and I told my husband that we have to go through Yeovil in order to stop at a coffee shop that a friend of mine runs, and I want to see her. Now, I am not sure, if you look at the map, we don't have to go through Yeovil, but my husband well knows that a happy, caffeinated, socialized wife is a happy life. So we have to go through Yeovil. Now, Jesus' motives, they were way purer than mine. His were possibly fueled even not by caffeine, but by way too much time with some overzealous, over-religious Pharisees that he wanted to get away from. And then there was this pull towards the woman he knew would be at the well in the heat of the day. So he made a beeline for Samaria. It reminded me of when Jesus said in John chapter 10, verse 16, he said, I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. Jesus had one particular encounter in mind, and he had to get there for noon because he knew who would be there then. So we continue in verse 9. It says, the Samaritan woman said to him, you are a Jew and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? She was also very aware of this countercultural interaction. And she was bemused that this Jew would not only be in Samaria, but that he would be talking to a Samaritan woman, no less. And even more outrageous, that he was asking to drink from her jar. Surely this was the height of contamination. In verse 10, Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Sir, the woman says, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well, and he drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock? Now, unfortunately, we can't read here, we can't hear here the tone in her voice. But I am well versed, not in politics, but in sarcasm. And I am hearing sarcasm all over her tone right now. She knows that the Jews consider themselves superior to the Samaritans, and she's taking this rare opportunity for a jab at one of these Jewish men. This Jew, who apparently is so superior that he is implying that he is even greater than one of the founders of their nation. She wants to make him feel like he's being a little bit audacious in his claim. Verse 13, Jesus answered, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. The woman said to him, sir, give me this water so I won't get thirsty and I won't have to keep coming here to draw water. Okay, so I really wish that I'd been there, eavesdropping on this conversation. I hear in this verbal back and forth, I think what she just does here, if there's any teenagers in the room, is what my tweens call burn. I think the literal term is sarcastic mocking. She is really giving him a hard time. And sarcasm, this is her defense mechanism. But it could also be that I've got her entirely wrong. It could be that she is hot and she is sick and tired of trudging up to this well, likely every day, in the heat of the day alone, to get something that just keeps getting used up again and again and again. And who knows whether it's even for her. It might be to give to somebody else. It might be that someone higher or more important than her in the social hierarchy is insisting that she is back here again. She could just be fed up of this endless trek, this daily pilgrimage that she has become a slave to. In verse 16, he told her, "Go, call your husband to come back." So this woman has just said, "Okay, give me your water." And then Jesus, somewhat surprisingly, his response to her is, "Go and get your husband." Now, I bet there was a really long pause after Jesus told her to go get her husband. I bet you could have heard a wishing penny drop down that well. How often did she have to answer this question? How it always had to come back to this issue, the issue of the husband. And here is a moment where she has a choice. This is what I call a hatch opening. A hatch opening is one, depending on the response, that has the potential to open up a whole new direction for a relationship. These questions, they take you to the inner room. They take you into the core of our identity. They take you into our holy of holies. And you and I, we have these hatch openings. They define us, they categorize us, they give us access to a one-way system that once someone goes in, relationally, things will never be the same. We usually take a beat when we answer them as we decide how much do I want to share. For me, one of my hatch openings used to be the innocent question, how many children do you have? Most of you know we have 3 effervescent daughters, but we also have a son called Daniel, who died when he was a baby when we were living in India. So when someone used to ask me, or I had to write on a form how many children I have, I'd look at that person and I would take a beat. Do I say 3 or 4? They could quickly count the 3 in front of me. How close did I want to let them in? This is a one-way hatch opening. If I tell my story here, then we are out of the shallows. It's an invitation into the deep, to the vulnerable and to the tender place. For a long time, it was my heart's holy of holies. And Jesus is all about getting into the holy of holies. He's all about tearing that curtain away and diving in. He's not interested in the superficial. He's not interested in skirting around the truth. He's not interested in the glib or the safe or the well-waxed facades that we are trained from really young to put on. He, as one author puts it, is the hound of heaven, and he is after our hearts. But we get to choose. Do we open the hatch door to him? So he asks, and he waits, and we breathe deep, and we can hear the penny drop, and then what? What if this woman had said, sure, and she went to get the man she was living with? What would that have then done to her relationship with Jesus? Well, for her, she chose to open the hatch. In verse 17, she says, I have no husband. And Jesus said to her, you are right when you say that you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true. Now, there are a range of opinions as to what the reason is for this woman's numerous marriages. They basically fall in one of 2 camps. On the one hand, people think that she's an adulterous woman who keeps cheating on her husband and moving on to a new one. On the other hand, some people say that she's a widow 5 times over, or a victim of men's games and using and abusing and discarding of her. On the one hand, she's painted as a villain. She's haughty and is now dealing with shunning and rejection that she has brought on herself. But on the other hand, she's the victim who is shamed and broken and helpless and downtrodden. Maybe we don't know because actually Jesus doesn't want us to distinguish. Maybe he's making the point that he would have responded exactly the same, whichever the circumstance. Both versions of history, ultimately it drove her to the well alone. Verse 19, Sir, the woman said, I can see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors, they worshipped here on this mountain, but you Jews, you claim that the place we must worship is in Jerusalem. So she's now recognized something of the divine in Jesus. She grabs this opportunity to ask him one of her deepest concerns. She is slowly beginning to tap in to her spiritual thirst. She wants to know how and where she can encounter God. She's been told that the place for that is somewhere off limits to Samaritans. Not only does it seem that human relationships are inaccessible to her, but she's also been told that the presence of God is inaccessible to her, that it's about a place and a way, and that she doesn't qualify. Woman, Jesus replied, believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans, you worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth. Those are the only 2 qualifiers. But Jesus, again, he is determined to tear down barriers, to break through anything that would hinder her from knowing salvation and having access to God. The time that he is talking about is so very, very near. Once he has died, the sacrificial atoning death on the cross, the curtain of the Holy of Holies will truly be torn, and God will become accessible to all. everywhere and anywhere in the world if they go through the hatch door of Jesus. This Jesus who is the way. Whoever is on pilgrimage and truly seeking and thirsting, he promises he will be found and he will come in. And what happens when he comes in? Well, we read in verse 25, the woman said, I know that Messiah called Christ is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. Then Jesus declared, I, the one speaking to you, I am he. Just then his disciples returned and they were surprised to find him talking with a woman, but no one asked, what do you want? Or why are you talking with her? Then leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, come, see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? They came out of the town and made their way toward him. I was at a dance class this last week, and we were learning how to do leaps in this class. And I meant to bring my shoes, but I forgot, and lucky for you, I won't be able to demonstrate said leaps. But my teacher, lovely Miss Gemma, she said something that rang so true, not only for dancing, but for followers of Jesus today. She said, if you want to spring high, you have to go down deep. If you want to spring high, you have to go down deep. And that's exactly what we are seeing here in this passage. This woman became filled with the living water, the water that springs up. Actually, the word used here for spring, this is the same word that's used for the lame man in Acts chapter 3 when he's healed. He's walking with Peter and John, and he begins walking and jumping and praising God. He's leaping. He's jumping up. Once this woman realized who Jesus was, she went with him into her deepest pain and shame and place of isolation. And then she received his promise of access to God through Jesus. And she sprang up to go and tell everyone about him. Why does she leave her jar? She leaves the jar because she now is a vessel. She is the spring. She is connected to the wellspring. She was bubbling up to overflow with life to the full. And she was going to go and shower everyone else with this living water. It's the move away from the carrying of the jars to the connection of the hose pipe that just goes wild. Because that is the fruit of an encounter with Jesus. It's evangelism. It's a life that's been so transformed that it's flowing over with new self-acceptance, with confidence, with adoration, with invitation. She's moved from isolation to community. She's moved from thirsting to overflowing and drawing others into the source. I love this passage. So in our last few minutes together, I want us to explore ways that this woman's encounter might connect with you and I here today. So 2 things. Firstly, I invite you to think about what might be your hatch opening. What is it that makes you take a beat when someone knocks on a particular area of your life? It's likely the thing that isolates you, either by our own withdrawal or by others' actual or even perceived rejection of us. Can you articulate what this root is that's pushing you out to the place where you are alone? Jesus is desperate to go there with you, with the greatest of compassion and empathy and delight. He wants to hear you speak of it and tell you that when you invite him in, he promises to really see you, to put a stop to your aimless wandering, and to come alongside you and to forgive you and to release you of your sin, of any pain, of any shame, of any guilt that has a hold on you. He has to go your way. He has made a point of meeting you here today and looking you in the eye and asking if you are willing to let him in. Secondly, I wonder, maybe there are some of us here who have been around church for years. And you've heard countless times about Jesus and his life and his death and his forgiveness and his invitation to you. But somehow you're left wondering, why is it that I'm not leaping? If we're honest, sometimes we're barely a trickle of water, let alone a hose pipe that's releasing the wellspring of living water to those around us. What if it feels like we're an empty well? Maybe even like a dangerous pit. And I wonder if maybe there's recognition that we keep filling ourselves with things that we hope will satisfy our thirst. Things like relationships, some career advancement, what our net worth is, shopping sprees, food obsession, fitness addiction, even just one more drink. All of these thirst traps that we soon realize is inferior water. The things that tickle our thirst, but only for a short time, and they actually just leave us more thirsty and alone. Kind of like having a diet of coffee and tea and Coke and not understanding when the doctor tells us, oh, you're dehydrated. But then we have a glass of water and we realize just how thirsty we really were, and we were just drinking from the wrong source. See, what we are thirsting for is too limited. He's not telling us to curb our thirst, but to aim higher. In the beautiful words of C.S. Lewis, he says, we are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered to us. Like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he can't understand what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased. And the invitation from Jesus to us is to lay down that jar, to stop expecting to be the source of deep satisfaction, and instead to connect to the wellspring that never dries up and never leaves us deficient. We will never know complete satisfaction until we are united with him and we see him face to face on that day. But he promises that by surrendering to him, we will be sustained by him until that day. If you want to spring up, you have to go down deep. And that's exactly what we're seeing here in this passage. The reason for her move from a desire for isolation to a life of effervescent evangelism was her connection to the deep, true, pure source of life. She now knows the complete satisfaction that can only come from being seen and understood by Jesus. And she couldn't help but worship and point others to him. So we're going to move into a time of worship soon. And we're going to sing these words, "Come, all pilgrims who thirst for more, come and drink the water of life." So I invite you to stand now as the worship team closes our time off in worship. Thank you.